300 million years ago, our planet looked completely different from today. Imagine a world where instead of familiar trees, giant horsetails grew as tall as a 10-story building, and millipedes crawled through the marshes, reaching the length of a baseball bat. These remarkable plants, known as lepidodendrons, reached heights of up to 30 meters and covered vast territories, forming true forests that were home to numerous prehistoric creatures.
But what is truly shocking, at that time the oxygen level in the atmosphere was as high as 35%, allowing giant insects to grow to sizes that seem impossible today. For example, dragonflies with a wingspan of 75 centimeters soared through the air like helicopters, hunting their prey among the dense foliage. And what about the millipedes? They looked like real monsters crawling over wet rocks and marshes, reaching lengths of 1 meter. How could they survive? The secret lay in the high concentration of oxygen, allowing their respiratory system to function at its limits. But that's not the most astonishing part. During this period, not only did giant plants and insects exist on Earth.
Giant amphibians, the size of crocodiles, splashed through water bodies, and predatory reptiles, which would later become the ancestors of dinosaurs, began to show their first signs.
These creatures were armed with sharp teeth and could hunt prey the size of a modern sheep. And here is where it gets truly bizarre. There were even ancient fish, 3 meters long, that were true predators in their ecosystems.
But wait, that's not all. Along with these amazing creatures, something incredible was happening on Earth. Huge coal deposits were forming, which would later become the basis for our modern energy.
These deposits were formed due to the decomposition of vegetation in conditions of high humidity, when organic remains did not have time to fully decompose. This created ideal conditions for the formation of coal, which would be used by humans millions of years later. But the most astonishing thing of all, these changes in the ecosystem prepared the ground for the appearance of dinosaurs, who would become the true rulers of the planet. How exactly did this happen? The answer is astonishing.
On Earth, there reigned an atmosphere that we can only dream of today. Temperatures fluctuated within the range of 30 degrees Celsius, and humidity reached 90%, creating conditions as if you were in a tropical paradise.
Imagine dense forests where each tree reached 30 meters in height, and vines hung from the branches like living curtains, allowing light to filter into the undergrowth. Flowers the size of plates bloomed everywhere, attracting a multitude of insects. And what is truly astonishing, in those times there were no seasons, and everywhere was eternal summer, with regular rains filling rivers and lakes, and the soil was so fertile that plants grew like mushrooms. Do you know what is even more shocking? In this climate there existed giant plants like Sigillaria and Lepidodendron, which grew up to 60 meters tall like living monuments of nature. All this created an ideal environment for numerous forms of life, including the first reptiles and amphibians, which began to colonize new ecosystems.
Can you imagine? Swarms of ancient insects the size of a pigeon filled the air, hunting their prey. And what if I tell you that the largest of them had a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters? They could be larger than some modern birds.
And here's where it gets really crazy. In such conditions, giant centipedes, as long as a baseball bat, began to crawl through the forest litter. How could they survive in this world? The secret lay in the high level of oxygen, which reached 35%, allowing creatures to grow to unprecedented sizes.
Once upon a time, Earth was home to creatures that we can only dream of, but it was in these tropical forests that the foundations of the future fauna we know today were laid.
In this world teeming with life and diversity, every detail played its role, forming an ecosystem that prepared the ground for the emergence of new species. You won't believe it, but it was in such conditions that the fossilized remains of trees began to form, which after millions of years would become the basis for future coal deposits. The oxygen content of the atmosphere during this period was so high that it reached 35%, which is 14% more than today. Imagine that. This meant that breathing in such conditions would have been a real pleasure, as if you were using an oxygen mask. But how did this happen? The key was the vast forest filled with giant plants like ferns and horsetails that actively produced oxygen. They covered the earth, forming dense forest masses, and according to estimates, their area exceeded that of modern tropical forests. In such conditions, plants could grow to incredible sizes. Some trees reached heights of 30 meters with trunks as thick as a small car. But that's not all. The oxygen they produced created ideal conditions for the existence of diverse forms of life. Massive colonies of microorganisms that decomposed organic matter in turn produced even more oxygen, creating a closed loop that supported life on the planet. Do you know what happens when the oxygen level is so high? Insects like dragonflies grew to the size of sparrows, and some species of millipedes reached lengths of 1 meter. Imagine them crawling through the forest, leaving trails in the soft earth. But that's not the strangest thing. The high oxygen level not only facilitated the growth of giant organisms, but also allowed amphibians like ancient frogs to become real monsters, the size of crocodiles. And here's where it gets really crazy. Some of them could hunt their own kind, using their speed and agility. This ecosystem had no equivalent, and life in it was full of surprises. If you thought this was amazing, wait.
In the conditions of such oxygen abundance, many animal species began to develop unique adaptations that allowed them to survive and dominate their niches.
For example, some insects had wingspans of up to 75 centimeters, enabling them to hunt other insects with unimaginable efficiency. And the craziest thing? These adaptations did not go without consequences. When the oxygen level began to decrease, many species could not adapt to the new conditions and became extinct, leaving behind only fossil remains. Imagine a forest where each tree is like a 30-story building. This is no exaggeration. Lepidodendrons could reach heights of 30 to 40 meters, and their trunks could have a diameter of up to 2 meters. These giant club mosses, which existed during the Carboniferous period, were one of the main components of ancient forests that stretched over vast territories. Their tough bark protected them from pests and diseases, while their branching crown created dense shade, fostering a unique ecosystem. But what is most astonishing?
Lepidodendrons had a leaf mass that could make up to 30% of the total volume of the forest, ensuring an incredible level of photosynthesis.
These plants not only survived but dominated their environment, filling the space between other species. Now, imagine this. In conditions of increased carbon dioxide levels, which were twice as high as today's, lepidodendrons would grow faster than any modern trees. They absorbed carbon dioxide and released oxygen, creating an atmosphere rich in oxygen, similar to today's tropical forests. Perhaps it was this that allowed them to reach such colossal sizes. And now, the truly mind-boggling part. Unlike modern trees that reproduce with seeds, lepidodendrons use spores for reproduction, which were carried by wind over vast distances. And what's even more shocking? These spores were the size of tennis balls, giving them a good chance of survival and colonizing new territories. Over time, lepidodendrons adapted to various conditions, and their roots could penetrate up to 3 meters deep, allowing them to find water even during droughts. But that's not all. Their ecosystems were home to numerous other species, including giant insects and amphibians that depended on these plants. And the most incredible thing?
Lepidodendrons were the ancestors of modern coniferous trees, and their disappearance was one of the reasons for the change in Earth's ecosystems, paving the way for new species.
These giants left behind powerful layers of coal which we use today as a source of energy. It's hard to believe that these plants formed the basis for the vast coal deposits found worldwide. The trunks of ancient lepidodendrons, reaching heights of up to 30 meters, were a true masterpiece of nature. Their surfaces were covered with characteristic rhombic scars formed by fallen leaves that left their marks on the wood. These scars not only gave the trunks a unique appearance, but also served as evidence of the vibrant life that surrounded them. Imagine a forest where giant trees with thick trunks rise, covered in numerous marks, as if they were preserving the stories of many seasons.
Each scar, up to 20 centimeters long, tells of how leaves fell, decomposed, and enriched the soil, creating ideal conditions for the growth of these giants.
But this is not the most astonishing thing. Lepidodendrons not only had impressive sizes, but also an extraordinary bark structure. The thickness of the bark could reach 30 centimeters, and its texture was hard and strong, like that of modern pines, allowing the trees to survive in conditions of overheating and high humidity. Do you know what is even more shocking? These trees could grow in conditions where the level of carbon dioxide was twice as high as today, which contributed to their colossal growth. The leaves of lepidodendrons were large, the size of an adult's palm, and their shape resembled feathers, allowing them to effectively use sunlight even in dense forests. Imagine that these leaves produced oxygen in quantities exceeding modern levels, creating an ideal climate for the life of other organisms. It is interesting that lepidodendrons were not the only ones occupying these forests. Other plant species also grew there, forming real ecosystems. And now, the most incredible thing, these trees could reproduce both by seeds and by vegetative propagation. This allowed them to occupy new territories, breaking through any obstacles. But how did they manage to survive such climate and habitat changes? The answer lies in their incredible ability to adapt and change their structure depending on the conditions of the surrounding environment. Scientific research shows that lepidodendrons could survive even when other plant species were dying, thanks to their unique root system, the depth of which reached 4 meters. This allowed them to obtain water from deep layers of soil when drought began on the surface. It is interesting that these plants left behind not only coal deposits but also entire layers of fossils that we find even today. Giant calamites, reaching heights of up to 20 meters, resembled modern bamboo thickets, but their size was astonishing even compared to today's plants. These plants had rigid trunks that not only supported their enormous size but also allowed them to effectively compete for sunlight in dense forests.
Interestingly, their unique trunk structure resembled tubes that could store a significant amount of water, helping them survive in high humidity conditions. To survive, they required a vast amount of nutrients, which they extracted from rich organic soil formed by decomposing plants and animals.
But that's not the most unusual thing. These calamites could reproduce not only by seeds but also vegetatively, allowing them to quickly colonize new territories. Imagine that in conditions where oxygen was twice as much as now, calamites could grow at an incredible speed, reaching maturity in just a few years. And now imagine this. Their leaves were covered with special waxy layers that protected them from excess moisture and helped prevent rotting. These plants not only dominated ecosystems but also created microclimates that allowed other species to exist. What's even more astonishing, their roots could penetrate several meters deep, allowing them to obtain water even in the driest seasons. Thus, they could survive in complex conditions that other plants wouldn't even dare to respond to. These giants didn't just grow, they changed the face of the planet, forming new ecosystems that would exist for millions of years. And when you think that's all, the anticipation of the next epoch prepared new wonders. It was during this time that processes began that would lead to the appearance of the first seed plants. Imagine a forest where each tree is like a 7-story building, and their leaves are as large as a small car. These were the arborescent pteridophytes, known as Ceronius, that dominated past ecosystems. These giants did not just grow, they had a peculiar root system that resembled a multitude of intertwined cords, deeply penetrating the soil to extract water and nutrients from the organic rich ground. The roots of Ceronius could reach lengths of up to 2 meters, enabling them to survive in high humidity conditions. But that's not all. Their leaves developed into complex structures that could reach up to 30 meters in length. This created dense green domes that protected against sunlight and provided shade for numerous other forms of life. And now, the most fascinating part. These leaves were not only large but also had a tough bark that could withstand strong winds, allowing the plants to survive in intense competition. Inside each leaf were special tubes called tracheids that transported water and nutrients, facilitating rapid growth and development. But there's more. Ceronius reproduced using spores the size of a tennis ball which were carried by the wind over long distances, enabling them to colonize new territories. Interestingly, such giant pteridophytes could grow from a single spore that, upon finding a suitable environment, would rapidly develop. This ability to compete with other plants eventually led them to become the primary producers of oxygen in their ecosystems, generating up to 30% of the gas, which was twice as much as today. Can you imagine the scale of these ecosystems? In such a forest one could find extraordinary creatures, giant insects, dragonflies with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters, which hunted small animals, and even reptiles the size of small cars. And the most astonishing fact? These arborescent pteridophytes were the ancestors of modern ferns, having retained their unique characteristics for millions of years. Chordates, the ancestors of modern conifers, dominated ecosystems, forming the first true forest that had no parallels at the time. These trees reached heights of up to 40 meters and had tough bark that protected them from bad weather and fires.
What's even more astonishing? Their seeds were the size of nuts, and some species had cones that were miniature cones up to 30 centimeters tall. They didn't just survive, they covered vast territories, creating dense forests where millions of different forms of life could thrive.
According to paleontologists, chordates could form forests that stretched over thousands of square kilometers, creating unique ecosystems teeming with diversity. Their needle-like leaves allowed them to efficiently absorb solar energy even in high humidity conditions, which was crucial for their survival in these forests. But that's not all. Some chordate species could reproduce not only by seeds but also vegetatively, allowing them to quickly colonize new territories. Imagine forests where every tree was a whole ecosystem, full of life, including insects, reptiles, and even mammals that sought shelter in their dense canopies. And the most amazing thing? Chordates left behind a vast number of fossil remains that helped scientists understand what life on Earth was like during that period. These remains, found in various parts of the world, allow us to reconstruct images of ancient forests teeming with life and movement. For instance, some findings in the USA have revealed trees that preserved their traces and were over 300 million years old. These fossil records help us understand how ecosystems evolved and how they influence climate and geological processes. And if you think that's the end, consider this. Core dates were one of the first steps in the formation of the modern bioma, where coniferous trees play a key role in the ecosystem. Imagine a world where there was twice as much oxygen as there is today, 35% compared to the current 21. This meant that giant plants like Sigillaria and Lepidodendron could grow up to 30 meters tall, like trees that could even overshadow 10-story buildings.
But that's not all. With such high levels of oxygen, these plants could develop incredibly powerful and extensive root systems that not only ensured their stability, but also allowed them to absorb water from the soil.
Now imagine that in this world there were virtually no pests that could threaten these giants. Rare insects, even those as large as small birds, couldn't compete with these massive plants. As a result, the plants didn't spend energy on defense and could focus on growth and reproduction. For instance, Sigillaria reproduced with spores that were larger than a tennis ball, allowing them to spread over vast distances through the air. And now, the most incredible part, these plants could grow so large that their canopies shaded entire forest areas, creating unique ecosystems. But what is truly astonishing is that in such an environment, even the smallest organisms like fungi became giants, growing to sizes that seem fantastical. These giant fungi could reach 30 centimeters in diameter and covered the ground, providing additional moisture for the plants. And what's even more shocking, the spores of these fungi were so sticky that they could adhere to the rough roots of trees, forming symbiotic relationships that supplied the plants with additional nutrients.
This entire ecosystem allowed the giants to survive and dominate the planet, creating conditions in which life could thrive. Now consider this. How could this incredible ecosystem have changed with the arrival of new climatic conditions?
Muddy forests that once occupied vast territories resembled true living laboratories. The trees could reach heights of 30 meters, and their trunks were so thick that they could rival the circumference of a car. These forests were densely populated with vegetation. Vines that wrapped around trunks created impassable green corridors, while the undergrowth of ferns and mosses spread like a green carpet. Imagine walking on soft, damp soil that seemed to absorb the sound of your steps. In this world, plants that thrived on constant moisture dominated. 30% humidity in the air allowed the trees to grow unceasingly. But the most astonishing thing is that these forests not only provided life but also served as habitats for numerous creatures at the top of the food chain. In the darkest corners, giant amphibians the size of crocodiles hunted insects the size of a fist. And what's even more shocking, these insects were strong enough to kill small vertebrates. The forest was filled with sounds, the creaking of branches under the weight of animals, to the rustling of leaves where predators hid. The leaves of the trees were wide and hard, allowing them to capture as much sunlight as possible, even in dense shade. And if that's not enough, consider that there were plants that could grow up to 5 meters tall with stems as thick as a human arm, creating true jungles teeming with life.
But that's not all. Among this biosphere were plants that could reproduce via spores the size of a tennis ball. These spores were carried by the wind and colonized new areas, creating new forests. If you thought that was all, prepare for a surprise. In such conditions, giant spiders up to 20 centimeters long hunted their prey with remarkable agility. These creatures were not only dangerous, but also incredibly effective in their ecosystem.
And if you've ever wondered how evolution could lead to such monstrous creatures, know that in these forests evolution continued, creating ever more amazing beings capable of adapting to constantly changing conditions. Millions of years ago, when Earth was covered in dense forests of giant ferns and conifers, processes began that would eventually form the world's largest coal deposits.
These plants, growing up to 30 meters tall, died and were submerged in swamps, where conditions for decomposition were extremely unfavorable. Remarkably, instead of decomposing, they began to transform into coal due to unique conditions.
Water and the absence of oxygen in the swamp facilitated the accumulation of organic material, creating ideal conditions for coal formation. Over several million years, this process accelerated. Layers of dead plants were covered by new sediments, and under pressure, peat layers formed.
Notably, at this stage, peat contained about 40% carbon, making it an ideal candidate for further transformation into coal.
Now, imagine how, under the pressure of several hundred meters of earth, this peat turned into coal, which we use today as fuel. Amazingly, even under high temperatures and pressure, the process of coalification could take up to 100 million years. What's fascinating is that some coal deposits we find today were formed from plants that existed in ecosystems similar to modern tropical rainforest. These plants with hard bark and leaves were much larger and denser than any existing today. As a result, when coal formed, it contained not only carbon but also numerous other minerals, affecting its properties. According to geologists, more than 1 trillion tons of coal were formed on different continents, still holding the secrets of the ancient world. The question arises, how were these ancient plants able to withstand all the changes in their environment and become the basis for our modern energy supply? The fascinating process of transforming ancient plants into coal begins when they accumulate in marshy areas where conditions favor their preservation. This means that these ecosystems have high humidity and low oxygen content, which hinder the decomposition of vegetation. These conditions create an ideal environment for the accumulation of organic material.
After the plants, such as giant ferns and horsetails, die, their stems and roots settle at the bottom of the bogs, forming a layer of peat. And here begins the real magic. Over time, under the pressure of layers of sediment, this peat compresses.
Imagine how pressing on a sponge makes water seep out. Exactly the same way. Under pressure and heat, gases and liquids gradually release from the peat. This process is called diagenesis, and it leads to the formation of lignin and cellulose, which form the basis of coal. But what is astonishing is that the coal we know today actually represents various stages of carbonization. In the early stages, brown coal forms, containing about 40% carbon, and as pressure and temperature increase, bituminous coal forms, containing up to 92% carbon.
This means that the deeper the coal seams, the more carbon they contain, making them more valuable for energy. It is interesting that in some regions of the world, such as Pennsylvania and Virginia, coal deposits can reach thicknesses of more than 30 meters. Now imagine, this is not just coal, but a real history, frozen in stone. Each piece of coal is a testament to how millions of years ago, life on the planet looked completely different from today.
But what is truly astonishing is that in the process of coal formation, not only plants but also various organisms, such as insects and even small vertebrates, can be preserved.
In some places, fossils have been found that have preserved even details such as dragonfly wings or leaves of ancient trees that lived in those same bogs.
This process of coal formation and its connection to ancient ecosystems create an incredible picture of life on Earth in the past. Now consider this. How many more secrets do these coal seams hold? Secrets that can tell us about climate changes, ecosystems, and even about mass extinctions when the level of carbon dioxide was twice as high as today. So what else lies hidden beneath the Earth, waiting to be discovered?
Imagine a dragonfly with a wingspan of up to 70 centimeters. It's not just an insect, but a living rocket capable of hunting other invertebrates in the air.
These giant dragonflies, known as meganeurids, dominated the skies when the Earth was covered in eternal greenery and a humid climate. They had powerful muscles that allowed them to reach speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour, and their eyes, consisting of millions of facets, provided excellent vision, capable of detecting the slightest movements in their environment.
What makes them truly unique, however, is their maneuverability. Can you imagine how they could turn on a dime like modern helicopters? Studies show that meganeurids could hunt other insects with the same agility as modern birds of prey. Did you know that they could even rise to heights of up to 100 meters using thermal air currents? Their wings were not just large, but also had a complex structure that allowed them to efficiently use lift. But that's not all. Their bodies could reach lengths of up to 25 centimeters, making them substantial but incredibly graceful in flight.
Moreover, scientists suggest that the high level of oxygen in the atmosphere, around 35%, contributed to their gigantic size. And now, the most astonishing fact. They could reproduce using spores as large as a tennis ball, which is astonishing given that modern dragonflies reproduce differently. These remarkable creatures inhabited an ecosystem where there were no birds or mammals, making them the top predators of their time. And now, when you think you know everything about meganeurids, it's worth noting that their fossils have been found on all continents, including Antarctica, indicating their widespread distribution.
Each discovery provides new insights into how they survived and adapted to various conditions. And now, imagine what could have happened if such giants existed today.
Imagine a millipede up to 2.5 meters long crawling through ancient forests. This is the Arthroptera, the largest terrestrial arthropod in history.
Its size is comparable to the length of a sedan car, and its weight could reach several kilograms. These creatures not only instilled fear in their competitors, but also dominated ecosystems where there were no large predators.
How could they reach such sizes? The answer lies in the high level of oxygen, which was 35%, twice as much as today. This allowed millipedes to obtain more oxygen necessary for growth and an active lifestyle. Arthroptera hunted small animals, and may have even competed with other large invertebrates. Did you know that their legs were covered in hard spines that protected them from potential threats? They crawled through flooded swamps where dense forest prevailed, and possibly used their long legs to forage in hard-to-reach places.
But that's not the strangest thing. Imagine that Arthroptera had eyes that could see in the ultraviolet spectrum, allowing them to hunt even in low light conditions.
And now, the most astonishing fact: despite their size, they could reproduce, laying hundreds of eggs that survived in conditions where many other species could not. So how did these giants disappear?
The answer is shocking. Climate change and competition with more advanced species such as reptiles became the decisive factors.
But here's the most incredible thing. In some places, fossil remains show that Arthroptera could have survived in the most diverse conditions and even adapted to new ecosystems if not for their extinction. Oxygen, which constituted 35%, exerted a colossal influence on the development of insects. It allowed them to grow to sizes that today might seem fantastic. Imagine a dragonfly with a wingspan of 75 centimeters, larger than some modern birds. These giants did not merely exist, they hunted their competitors and dominated ecosystems filled with eternal greenery and humidity. Scientists assert that such sizes were possible due to the unique respiratory systems of insects, which could efficiently absorb large amounts of oxygen. How did this work? Their tracheae, specialized breathing tubes, could expand, allowing vast volumes of air to enter the body, which ensured high metabolic rates and activity. And this is where things get truly extraordinary. Some researchers suggest that even millipedes reached lengths comparable to a baseball bat, making them not only impressive but also dangerous.
Paleontologists have discovered fossilized remains of such creatures, which were not only larger than modern ones but also possessed significantly more complex anatomy. What is even more shocking?
Their exoskeletons, hard outer shells, were so robust that they could withstand the pressure of increasing sizes. This allowed them to survive in environments where resource competition was fierce. And how did they reproduce? These colossal insects laid eggs that hatched in conditions where oxygen was abundant, facilitating the survival and growth of their offspring. In some cases, growing to sizes comparable to cats, these creatures could find food in the form of small amphibians, which were also not small. Thus the ecosystem of that time was filled with giants, each playing its role in the chain of life. The question is, how did oxygen change so drastically? The answer might be even more intriguing than the sizes of these insects. Climate changes led to a decrease in oxygen levels, and only those species that could adapt survived in the future. Imagine giant cockroaches roaming the earth, reaching the size of a rat. This is the Archimelacris, a beetle that could instill fear even in the bravest. Its length could reach 30 centimeters, and it was not just an insect, but a true monster of its time. These creatures were not only frightening to look at, they were beautifully adapted to the conditions in which they lived. And here's an interesting fact. Their hard wings allowed them not only to move but also to create sounds that could resemble the rustling of leaves. Imagine how this sound would echo in a dense forest, making the heart stop. But how did they manage to survive among predators? Their secret lay in the unique structure of their chitinous exoskeleton, which provided protection from attacks and adverse environmental conditions.
It's important to remember that their diet was not limited to plant remains. Archimelacris was omnivorous and did not hesitate to feed on carrion, actively hunting small invertebrates.
But that's not all. Their curved antennae, up to 10 centimeters long, allowed them to sense changes in the air and find food at a distance, much like modern detectors. What's even more shocking, these insects could reproduce by laying eggs the size of a walnut which they placed in protected places, ensuring the survival of their offspring in a harsh environment. And now, imagine that at that time the oxygen level was 35% higher than it is now, allowing them to survive and grow to such sizes.
The increased oxygen level created ideal conditions for their growth, and in this world they were true rulers. Giant cockroaches not only dominated but also left behind numerous fossils that have become true artifacts for modern scientists. Each discovered exoskeleton provides insight into their life, how they hunted, how they survived, and how they interacted with each other.
And just when we think we know everything about them, a new discovery emerges that could change our understanding of what life on the planet was like millions of years ago.
In each fragment of their fossils, scientists find traces that suggest Archimelacris could even have been a social insect, something that is completely unimaginable for such creatures. Scorpions, such as Pulmonoscorpius, were true giants of their time. Their length could reach up to 70 centimeters, and they dominated the land, hunting small animals and insects.
Their powerful pincers were not just for intimidation, they could even bite through the hard shells of other creatures. Imagine encountering such a predator in a forest. Its body, covered in a hard exoskeleton, reflected sunlight, creating a striking shine. These scorpions did not just crawl on the ground, they actively hunted their prey, using their monstrous size to their advantage. Unlike modern scorpions, Pulmonoscorpius had a unique respiratory system that allowed them to survive in low-oxygen environments, which were typical of their surroundings. What's even more astonishing?
These creatures could live underwater, using special gills, making them versatile predators capable of adapting to various conditions. While many other animals struggled with climate changes, Pulmonoscorpius thrived.
Their distinctive features, such as large eyes and powerful limbs, provided an ideal combination for hunting and survival. This period was marked by incredible biological diversity, and Pulmonoscorpius scorpions are a prime example of this. They not only survived but also flourished, leaving behind numerous fossils that scientists study today to understand how these creatures adapted to their environment.
It's fascinating that their fossils have been found even in places like North America and Europe, indicating a wide range of habitats.
And the most incredible thing, scientists suggest that such creatures could have been the ancestors of modern scorpions, challenging our understanding of the evolution of these predators.
Traits preserved in their DNA can still be traced in modern species. With each new discovery, it becomes clear that the evolution of these creatures was far more complex and mysterious than we could have imagined. And what's even more remarkable, some fossil finds show signs of interaction between Pulmonoscorpius and other species, indicating the complex ecosystems that existed during that time.
At that time, giant insects dominated the planet, and you know what? Their sizes were astonishing. Imagine a dragonfly with a wingspan of 75 centimeters. That's larger than some modern birds. But here's the paradox. There were no large vertebrate predators capable of controlling the sizes of these arthropods. How was this possible? The atmosphere contained 35% oxygen, twice as much as today. This created ideal conditions for the growth of insects, which could survive and reproduce in enormous numbers. But why didn't predators take over the top of the food chain? The problem was that vertebrates were just beginning to evolve. For instance, the first amphibians that could have competed with large predators were relatively small and lacked the same hunting skills. If they had grown to the size of modern crocodiles, this could have changed the situation.
But in reality, their sizes were limited, and they couldn't compete with centipedes as long as a baseball bat or spiders the size of a cat. This meant that the ecosystem was in balance, with large insects dominating.
And here's where it gets really strange. Some of these insects had hard shells and sharp spines that served as protection against potential predators.
But even if predators had appeared, they would have faced another problem, the high concentration of oxygen. This allowed insects to breathe more efficiently than vertebrates, creating another barrier to predatory competition.
What's even more shocking, these giants could reproduce by spores the size of a tennis ball, making their colonies practically invulnerable to predators. How could the ecosystem sustain such large insects without control from vertebrates? The answer lies in the fact that at that time, other forms of life also influenced the balance of nature. For example, sharks and other marine creatures only began to venture onto land millions of years later. At that time, giant crustaceans up to 30 inches long could have competed, but their sizes didn't reach the level of true predators. Their ways of survival and reproduction were adapted to conditions that left no chance for vertebrates. This created a unique ecosystem where sizes and forms of life intertwined in amazing ways, leaving us to wonder how life on Earth would continue to evolve. The first amphibians, such as Areopods and Diplocaulus, became true stars of their time, and their sizes were simply astonishing. The length of a Diplocaulus reached 3 meters, comparable to the height of a human, and its streamlined body allowed it to move quickly in water. Imagine these creatures with powerful fins and strong legs easily navigating both land and water, hunting fish and other small creatures. Areopods, on the other hand, had an incredible ability to adapt to various living conditions. Their length reached almost 2 meters, and their relatively long legs helped them confidently move through marshy areas, where they could find food. And now, the most interesting part, these amphibians had a unique respiratory system that allowed them to dive to depths of 10 meters, where they could remain underwater for up to 30 minutes. Can you believe it? They also had complex teeth, similar to those of modern crocodiles, making them formidable predators of their time. These teeth were not only sharp, but also well adapted for grasping slippery prey. Areopods and Diplocaulus differed significantly from their ancestors, and their appearance was a true revolution in the world of amphibians. Their lives took place in the midst of dense tropical forests where they could hide from predators and find shelter in thickets. Imagine areopods crawling on the ground, encountering giant insects with a wingspan of up to 75 centimeters, making their hunting even more exciting. And the most incredible thing? These creatures were the ancestors of modern amphibians, but their appearance was completely different from the familiar frogs and salamanders.
Their skin was covered with a hard shell, not a slimy membrane like modern amphibians, which helped them better protect themselves from external threats.
It's hard to believe, but during this period there were many species that now seem completely fantastic. The incredible diversity of forms and sizes created a unique ecosystem where predators and herbivores found their niches. And now imagine that some of these amphibians could climb trees using their strong limbs, putting them on par with modern lizards. And amidst all this diversity, Eriopods and Diplocaulus became symbols of adaptation and survival in conditions that we can barely imagine today. Aegiornis, measuring up to 4.5 meters, was a true giant among amphibians of its time. Imagine a creature that would have revolutionized our understanding of aquatic predators. Its body was a combination of modern crocodiles and lizards, but on a much larger scale.
With its powerful limbs, Aegiornis could easily move both on land and in water, using its strong paws for efficient swimming. But what makes this creature truly remarkable are its teeth.
They were enormous and sharp, like those of a shark, enabling Aegiornis to hunt large prey such as fish and even other amphibians. What's even more astonishing, this amphibian had a unique breathing ability. It could breathe both air and through its skin, allowing it to stay underwater for extended periods. This meant Aegiornis could hunt without surfacing, remaining undetected by its prey.
In the ecosystems of its time, it dominated, and according to research, its genes formed the basis for the further evolutionary development of amphibians.
But there's more. Scientists discovered that Aegiornis could reproduce both in water and on land, giving it adaptive advantages in variable environments. However, despite its size and adaptability, Aegiornis faced significant challenges as the climate changed. As temperatures fluctuated and water bodies dried up, its population declined. And here's the most intriguing part. Scientists found fossils of Aegiornis dating back to a period when its species was already considered extinct, raising questions about how long it actually survived. These discoveries opened new horizons for understanding how large amphibians could adapt to extreme conditions. Amphibians of that time were not just inhabitants of land, they were true water conquerors, bound to bodies of water due to their unique reproductive characteristics. Imagine that each female could lay up to 1,000 eggs, each about 1 millimeter in diameter, and these eggs continued to develop in a protected environment where the temperature remained constant and the oxygen level was twice that of today.
But what is truly astonishing is that for successful reproduction, they required a certain level of humidity, which, combined with warm temperatures, created ideal conditions for their offspring.
This meant that amphibians had to search for suitable water bodies where they could not only lay their eggs, but also ensure the safety of their offspring, which needed water for their development after hatching. It is known that some species could reproduce in small water bodies as shallow as 15 centimeters, but they had to avoid predators like ancient fish with knife-like teeth. Now, imagine these amphibians using their long, lizard-like tails to swim and maneuver among water plants, making their lives easier in this dangerous world. But that's not all. Some species even evolved the ability to undergo metamorphosis, allowing them to transition from aquatic to terrestrial life. What's most remarkable is that these metamorphoses could occur in just a few weeks, enabling them to quickly adapt to changing environmental conditions and return to water when necessary. But how did they manage such rapid changes? The answer lies in their unique physiology. Their skin could absorb water and oxygen directly from the surrounding environment, allowing them to survive even outside water bodies for short periods. This offers a completely new perspective on how amphibians could not only survive but also thrive in conditions that seem impossible today. And what's even more incredible, some of these creatures could reach lengths of up to 2 meters, making them giants of their time. The first reptiles began to appear in ecosystems already teeming with amphibians, and their emergence was a true breakthrough. Some of these new creatures, known as amniotes, were able to adapt to life on land thanks to a unique egg structure that could develop outside of water. Imagine that instead of relying on a wet environment for reproduction, these reptiles could lay eggs on land, where they were protected from predators and harsh conditions. But that's not all. Their skin became harder and more waterproof, allowing them to survive in conditions where amphibians suffered from dehydration. What's even more astonishing, these reptiles could reach sizes comparable to modern crocodiles, making them formidable predators of their time. While amphibians remained dependent on water, reptiles began to dominate new territories, paving the way for their further evolution. The first known reptile, such as the Halorhizaur, could reach lengths of up to 2 meters and hunted smaller animals using its sharp teeth. These predators not only survived but also began to actively colonize diverse ecosystems. occupying niches previously inaccessible to amphibians. Moreover, their powerful limbs allowed them to move quickly across land, giving them an advantage in hunting and protection from predators. Picture a world where these reptiles freely crawled through forests filled with tall plants and trees reaching heights of 30 meters. While large amphibians remained restricted in their movements, reptiles could explore new territories, finding food and shelter. But how did they cope with climate changes? The secret lay in their ability to adapt to various conditions, including higher temperatures and low humidity. These changes acted as a catalyst for their evolution and diversification, ultimately leading to the appearance of numerous species that formed the basis for future dinosaurs. Now, imagine these reptiles not only survived but also began to actively reproduce, resulting in the emergence of new forms of life that eventually dominated the planet. Isn't that intriguing? Gelonimus, a remarkable reptile that inhabited dense forests, was the size of a lizard, but its unique features are truly breathtaking. Imagine a small predator about 50 centimeters long, with sharp teeth perfectly suited for hunting insects and small vertebrates.
Intriguingly, its body was covered in scales that not only protected it from predators but also allowed it to adapt to various climatic conditions. Gelonimus was also able to move quickly, giving it an advantage in hunting. Its legs were long and thin like those of modern lizards. But what is even more astonishing?
Scientists have discovered that Gelonimus may have had the ability to regulate its body temperature, allowing it to survive in conditions of variable temperature. But this is just the beginning of its mysterious story. It is important to note that due to its structure, it was one of the earliest representatives of a group that later gave rise to dinosaurs. This discovery changes our understanding of evolution. It turns out that predators with such characteristics existed much earlier than we thought. How did Gelonimus cope with competition? The secret lay in its exceptional hunting skills and ability to camouflage among the leaves. Imagine it hiding among the plants, waiting for its prey to pass by. And now, the most incredible part, Gelonimus could change the color of its scales to blend in with its surroundings. This remarkable ability could have allowed it not only to hunt, but also to avoid encounters with larger predators of the time. Scientific research shows that its remains have been found on 3 continents, including North America and Europe, indicating its wide distribution. But that's not all. Very recently, scientists discovered that its bone structure contains more minerals than that of most other reptiles, suggesting that Gelonimus was more robust and adaptable than previously thought. And the most intriguing part? Some researchers suggest that its ancestors may have been related to modern birds, opening up new horizons in the study of evolution. Gelonimus may be small, but its role in the history of life on Earth turns out to be much more significant than we could have imagined. The amniotic egg was a breakthrough for reptiles, opening the door to the conquest of land. This egg, enclosed in a sturdy shell, allowed the embryo to develop in conditions previously impossible for amphibians. Imagine this. Inside the egg, an ideal environment with high humidity was maintained, eliminating the risk of drying out. This change allowed reptiles to lay eggs in the most diverse places, from deserts to forests, significantly increasing the chances of survival for their offspring. And what's even more astonishing? The amniotic egg contains several membranes. One of them, the chorion, participates in gas exchange, while the other, the allantois, accumulates metabolic waste. This means that the embryo had everything it needed for full development without relying on water as its ancestors did. Don't believe me? Around 90% of all modern reptiles use amniotic eggs, and this mechanism has remained viable for millions of years. For example, lizards and turtles still use this adaptation for reproduction. The appearance of the amniotic egg was not just an evolutionary step, but a true revolutionary achievement that allowed reptiles to move onto land and conquer new ecosystems. Imagine a world where rain was rare, and reptiles could survive and reproduce in conditions that would have been deadly for them before.
Moreover, this egg became the basis for further revolutionary changes that led to the appearance of mammals, including us. And how did reptiles manage to adapt to such diverse conditions?
The amniotic egg allowed them to avoid competition with amphibians, which were tied to water for reproduction. Now imagine this. Thanks to the amniotic egg, reptiles were able to occupy ecological niches that were previously inaccessible. As a result, a wide variety of species appeared on Earth, from crocodiles to dinosaurs, each adapted to its environment. And after millions of years, this adaptation led to the true dominance of reptiles on the planet. But what's truly shocking, some researchers claim that this egg was the basis for the further development of mammals, whose ancestors also began to conquer land. How is this possible? The amniotic egg opened the way for complex life organization on Earth, which continues to develop to this day. Pelycosaurs, or pelycosaurs with characteristic sails on their backs, were true giants of their time. Some of them reached lengths of 6 meters. Imagine an animal that could look like a hybrid of a lizard and a mammal, crawling through swamps where ancient trees, reaching heights of over 30 meters, grew. These creatures not only amazed with their size but also with their unique structure. On their backs they had high sails made of bones and skin, which, as it is believed, could be used for thermoregulation. Why did they need this? It turns out that thanks to these sails they could regulate their body temperature, allowing them to survive in hot climates. Their slender limbs and powerful jaws helped them hunt fish and small animals, living in water bodies teeming with life. But this is not the most astonishing thing. Pelycosaurs had teeth that were like needles, perfectly suited for catching slippery prey. Do you know what is even more shocking? These creatures not only dominated on land, but were also among the first to start colonizing aquatic ecosystems. Their life was filled with competition with other reptiles, such as diapsids, which began to occupy the same niches. How did they cope with this? Their secret lay in their ability to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. While some species went extinct, others survived thanks to their evolution. These ancient creatures not only survived but also left their mark on the history of life on Earth, becoming ancestors of later mammals. It is interesting that their sails could even serve to attract partners, creating a spectacle that left other members of their species indifferent. Scientific research shows that these sails could reach heights of up to 1 meter, adding to their impressiveness. And this is not all. Pelycosaurs could be both herbivorous and carnivorous, which further complicated their behavior and way of life.
Take a look at their anatomy. Powerful lungs allowed them to breathe in conditions where the oxygen level was significantly higher than today's. The result? They could grow and develop to enormous sizes, which today's mammals can only dream of.
Isn't it intriguing? Ahead of you are even more fascinating facts about how these ancient creatures interacted with their environment and what mysteries their fossils hold. Dimethrodon, the size of a car, was not just a predator. It was the first large terrestrial predator to hunt its prey with extraordinary efficiency. Imagine an animal up to 4 meters long with a characteristic sail on its back that could reach heights of up to 60 centimeters. This was not just an ornament, but a crucial element of thermoregulation. This sail helped Dimethrodon retain heat, making it an ideal hunter in cold morning hours. How did they hunt? Dimethrodons were true masters of ambush. With their incredible speed and agility, they could suddenly attack their prey.
Picture a giant lizard with jaws that could open 20 centimeters, swiftly pouncing on an unsuspecting herbivore. Their teeth were sharp and pointed, perfectly suited for tearing flesh.
Unlike most creatures that relied on packs for hunting, Dimethrodons operated alone, establishing their dominant position in an ecosystem that was just beginning to develop. But that's not the most unusual thing. Dimethrodons were not dinosaurs, but ancestors of modern mammals, making them significant figures in evolution. Around 300 million years ago, when they began to appear, Earth was home to early diverse life, but Dimethrodons became a symbol of the transition from reptiles to mammals. If you thought that was impressive, consider that their hunting habits helped them survive even in competition with larger predators. As the ecosystem changed, Dimethrodons found new food sources and adapted to environmental changes, allowing them to remain at the top of the food chain. And here's another astonishing fact. Dimethrodons could survive in conditions where the oxygen level in the atmosphere was significantly higher than today, reaching 35%, which facilitated their growth and activity. How did this affect their behavior and development? In reality, it created favorable conditions for their size and population growth.
But there's more. Dimethrodons had a unique reproductive system that differed significantly from modern mammals, and this discovery continues to amaze scientists today.
And finally, you won't believe this. Their fossilized remains continue to be found in the most unexpected corners of the world, revealing new key facts about the lives of these remarkable predators. By the end of the Carboniferous period, the climate underwent radical changes that laid the foundation for the events that occurred at the beginning of the Permian period. Imagine this. Around 30% of Earth's surface was covered by vast swamps and tropical forests, where giant ferns and conifers, reaching heights of up to 30 meters, thrived. However, this period of wet and warm conditions began to change.
Temperatures gradually decreased and the level of carbon in the atmosphere significantly dropped. For comparison, the concentration of carbon dioxide decreased to half of its previous levels, forcing nature to adapt to the new conditions.
And here's the fascinating part. The plants that once dominated the forest began to die out, and more drought-resistant species, such as seeds with hard shells, took their place. At this time, enormous deserts emerged where there were once green oases, creating new ecological niches. The climate changes also affected marine fauna. The oceans retreated from the land, and many marine species disappeared as their usual habitats were threatened.
Meanwhile, on land, new species such as trilobites and ammonites began to dominate, adapting to the new conditions. But wait, there's more.
The period we are discussing was also marked by the largest volcanic eruptions, which were believed to have caused mass extinctions. These eruptions released enormous amounts of sulfur and carbon into the atmosphere, exacerbating climate changes and contributing to the formation of acidic rain. As a result, ecosystems faced colossal challenges. And what's even more shocking, these volcanic activities led to a change in sea levels by as much as 100 meters, dealing a catastrophic blow to coastal ecosystems.
While ecosystems were grappling with the aftermath of volcanic activity, the planet was experiencing remarkable changes in climate.
Imagine that temperatures began to plummet rapidly, and in some regions the average annual temperature dropped to 16 degrees Celsius, significantly lower than in previous epochs. And here's the fascinating part. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere decreased by 30%, causing vegetation to wither. Forests that once stretched for thousands of kilometers began to thin, giving way to dry steppes with harsh conditions. Deserts, once rare, became the norm, stretching over millions of square kilometers, with temperatures reaching 50 degrees.
Do you know what this means? It meant that many species of animals and plants faced extinction threats. While some species adapted, their populations rapidly declined.
For instance, certain amphibians like some ancient salamanders began to disappear due to habitat loss. Meanwhile, small reptiles and mites, which once dominated ecosystems, started preying on other creatures to survive, creating harsh competition.
But this is not the most shocking part. During this period, the planet transitioned to a drier climate, leading to the extinction of nearly 80% of all plant and animal species.
Imagine how ecosystems began to collapse, and new forms of life emerged, adapting to these harsh conditions. For example, certain grasses and shrubs began to develop roots that could penetrate several meters deep in search of water. This means that nature itself created new systems to survive in conditions of water scarcity. Animals like the ancestors of modern lizards began to develop the ability to withstand long periods of fasting. And here's where it gets truly extraordinary. Some species even learned to survive without water for several months, relying on their fat reserves. At the same time, marine ecosystems were facing colossal challenges due to climate changes and the reduction of vegetation.
Marine life, which once thrived, now faced new threats, and the oxygen levels in the oceans dropped, leading to mass extinctions of marine organisms. Do you know what this means for ecosystems?
It meant that both on land and in the water, a real catastrophe was unfolding and life as we knew it was under threat. But what's even more shocking, some species that survived began to evolve to adapt to new conditions, leading to the emergence of entirely new species. And this is just the beginning of what is in store for the planet in the future. Climate change has led to a dramatic transformation of the flora that once dominated the Earth. Imagine that giant trees, reaching heights of 30 meters, began to disappear due to sudden cooling and a decrease in humidity. These giants, which once formed dense forests, now face extinction, and their place is taken by smaller, more adapted vegetation. While forests stood where each tree was like a 10-story building, climate change brought about the replacement of these giants with shorter plants that could survive in the new conditions.
What is truly shocking is that some species, such as tree ferns, managed to adapt and survive even when the level of carbon in the atmosphere dropped to 30% of its former level.
This meant that life on Earth became significantly less diverse, and many dominant species disappeared. If you thought this was the worst, consider this. Climate change has not only led to the extinction of giant trees but also to the emergence of entirely new ecosystems. While some species were dying out, others, more resilient to change, began to spread actively. For example, plants like horsetails began to dominate new territories, reaching almost 2 meters in height. And then imagine that small lizards followed them, developing new hunting and survival strategies in the changed conditions. These conditions affected not only the flora but also the fauna. Many animal species adapted to the new conditions, and their sizes decreased to match the more modest resources. But the most shocking changes occurred at the heart of the ecosystems. Species interactions began to change, and those that survived started to create new food chains.
Resilient plant species led to the appearance of new insects, which in turn became food for small reptiles.
And here's where it gets really crazy. As a result of all these changes, some species became so specialized that their survival depended on a single plant species.
For example, small beetles that could only feed on certain types of horsetails became so vulnerable that their survival depended on the preservation of these plants.
But what is truly astonishing is that climate change has affected not only the flora and fauna, but also geological processes. Glaciers that began to retreat changed the landscape, creating new ecosystems. This means that climate changes did not just alter life on Earth. They became a catalyst for the creation of completely new forms of life and new ecosystems.
Moreover, some of these changes became the basis for further evolution, leading to the appearance of species that we can hardly imagine.
When the planet's temperature began to change rapidly, forests filled with giant horsetails and ferns faced real trials. These plants, once dominant in ecosystems, encountered conditions they could barely imagine. For instance, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere started to rise sharply. Its level reached nearly 2,000 parts per million, which was twice the current levels. This led to a hotter and drier climate, making it difficult for the plants to survive. Meanwhile, their roots, which usually were in fertile soil, now faced conditions where water was scarce. How could this have happened? The secret lies in the fact that during global ecosystem changes there was a massive release of carbon from underwater volcanoes, creating conditions for powerful ecological disasters. But this was just the beginning. Alongside climate changes, competition with more adaptable plants such as seed-bearing plants became increasingly fierce. These new forms of life had an advantage. They could reproduce through seeds, which ensured their survival in harsh conditions. Meanwhile, horsetails and ferns relied on spores, which were less resilient to changing climatic conditions.
What's even more shocking, in some ecosystems the oxygen level dropped to 21%, significantly increasing the chances of survival for smaller but more adaptable plants.
While horsetails, reaching heights of 3 meters, began to retreat, the forest where they once dominated began to fill with new species that could take their place. And here's where it gets really fascinating. With the disappearance of these giants, new mammals emerged, evolving in completely unexpected directions. Their appearance changed the face of our planet and over millions of years led to the existence of such creatures as modern elephants and cetaceans. But that's not all. During this time, Earth experienced true ecosystem revolutions that continue to amaze scientists with their consequences. For example, this was the period when the first true forests with flowering plants began to form, making possible the appearance of new forms of life that we are not even aware of.
Initially, the first genuine coniferous trees began to rapidly colonize the land, marking a pivotal moment in the history of our planet.
Imagine vast forests where tall trees with sharp, needle-like leaves, reminiscent of thorns, stretched to 30 meters in height. These coniferous giants, such as Arctophyllum and pines, dominated the landscape, creating dense green expanses that served as sanctuaries for new forms of life.
It's fascinating that during this period, the atmosphere contained 30% oxygen, 1.5 times more than today, allowing plants to grow and develop at an unprecedented speed.
Can you picture the stifling air and the abundance of oxygen creating conditions where even insects reached sizes that seem fantastical today? These coniferous forests did not merely alter the planet's appearance, they became homes for numerous animals and insects that adapted to the new living conditions. For instance, ancient lizards up to 2 meters long hunted among the roots of these trees, using their sharp teeth and agility to secure their place in the ecosystem. But that's not the most astonishing part. Coniferous trees possessed a unique ability to regenerate, enabling them to recover even from severe forest fires, which were commonplace at the time. What's even more shocking? These forests were so dense that light barely pierced through the foliage, creating a twilight where strange creatures, including the ancestors of modern mammals, the size of a cat, dwelt. And just when we think we've learned everything about coniferous trees, we realize their seeds were so small and light that they could travel kilometers through the air, colonizing new lands and creating new forest ecosystems. These processes happened so quickly that within a few million years, coniferous trees covered vast territories, altering the climate and landscape as we know it. All this preceded incredible changes in the biosphere that we are just beginning to understand.
For example, not all coniferous trees grew to such great heights. Some reached only 1 meter, but their dense canopies provided shelter for numerous creatures. With each new discovery, it becomes clearer that coniferous forests were not only vital components of the ecosystem, but also true drivers of evolution.
Now imagine how all this could have looked, dark forests teeming with life, where each tree, each needle played its role in the complex game of nature. And did you know that some of these ancient coniferous trees have survived to this day and still grow on our planet? Seed-bearing plants that emerged during this period became true innovators in the world of flora. Imagine how they gradually conquered dominance in conditions where the climate became increasingly arid. These plants began to develop seeds that were protected by hard shells, ensuring their survival in harsh conditions.
Did you know that it was precisely due to this that seeds could remain viable for tens of millions of years, even in conditions where other species could not cope with the lack of moisture?
These seeds contained nutrients that allowed them to germinate only when conditions were truly favorable. And now, the most astonishing fact: some of these seeds could sleep for years, waiting for rain before awakening to life. Seed-bearing plants such as ginkgo and conifers utilize their potential to adapt to changing conditions. While other plants depended on water, seed plants could germinate in the driest places, making them ideal for survival in new ecosystems. At the same time, their root systems developed deep into the ground, reaching water-bearing layers, allowing them to extract moisture from the earth's depths. And what is even more astonishing, some of them could grow to 25 meters in height, creating shade for other, less hardy plants. This created complex ecosystems where seed plants acted as landscape architects, forming new biomes. It is known that it was then that the first forests dominated by conifers began to appear, which not only protected the soil but also created favorable conditions for the life of many animals. And even in conditions of drought, these forests thrived, thanks to the fact that seeds could remain in a state of dormancy until the rainy seasons arrived. As a result of these adaptations, seed plants took key positions in ecosystems, changing their structure and functionality. It is interesting to note that it was during this time that the first flowering plants began to appear, bringing new colours and aromas into the world of plants. Now, imagine what mysteries and riddles may be hidden in the seeds that have survived to this day, remaining unopened in the ground, waiting for their time. The decrease in oxygen levels in the atmosphere led to a true catastrophe for the insect world. Imagine that the oxygen content dropped to 21%, which is significantly lower than the 35% that was present in previous eras. This meant that insects that once reached colossal sizes, dragonflies with wingspans of 80 centimeters, began to experience serious difficulties with breathing. How could this be possible? Their respiratory systems were adapted to high oxygen levels, and when this gas became scarce, the sizes of insects began to gradually decrease.
Just imagine that in low oxygen conditions, beetles that once crawled like modern dogs are now the size of peas. In such conditions, survival depended on the ability to adapt, and many species perished, unable to cope with the changes. But this is not the most astonishing part. Some insects that survived began to evolve into completely new forms to adapt to the new conditions.
For example, small flies began to dominate in ecosystems, using their smaller sizes as an advantage to compete for resources.
Now imagine this. While some species were going extinct, others found ways to survive, creating new ecosystems that were unlike the old ones. How could such changes affect the delicate balance of nature?
The answer lies in the fact that insects not only survived but also began to develop unique strategies for reproduction and feeding to make the most of limited resources. And here is where it gets truly bizarre. At this time, entire ecosystems were built around these small creatures that changed the face of the planet.
Did you know that some of these insects could live in symbiosis with plants, helping them pollinate and in return, receiving food? This was a whirlwind of changes that led to the formation of new species that still amaze biologists today.
What other peculiarities does the history of insects in changing conditions hide? Therapsids were not just the ancestors of modern mammals, but true masters of adaptation who survived in an environment dominated by giant reptiles. Isn't it fascinating? These creatures could reach sizes comparable to large modern dogs and weigh up to 100 kilograms. Their skeletons were lighter and more flexible than those of their reptilian neighbors, giving them an advantage in speed and maneuverability. Imagine them hunting small animals with their sharp teeth, reminiscent of the modern incisors of mammals.
Unlike their reptilian ancestors, therapsids had a more complex thermoregulation system. Their bodies could maintain a constant temperature, allowing them to survive even in harsh conditions.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Some species, like the Dimetrodon, had extraordinary spines on their backs that may have served for thermoregulation or attracting mates. One of the most striking features of therapsids is that they were starting to develop characteristics typical of mammals, such as a more advanced structure of the ear, which allowed them to better perceive sounds. Did you know that some therapsids had fur? It was similar to the primary hair of mammals and helped them retain heat in cold conditions. But that's not all. Their descendants not only survived but also began to thrive, filling the ecological niches left by the extinct reptiles. These creatures exhibited incredible plasticity and adaptability, which was crucial to their survival in the face of rapid climate changes. And the most amazing thing? Therapsids began to develop complex social structures which was rare for the time. Some of them could hunt in groups, increasing their chances of success. Picture a pack of therapsids working together to catch their prey. Isn't that exciting? Their legacy lives on in every modern mammal, from a mouse to an elephant, making their history even more intriguing. Therapsids were not just the ancestors of mammals, they were the key to understanding how life on Earth changed over millions of years. In some cases, their size reached 2 meters in length, making them one of the largest land animals of their time. But what happened to these remarkable creatures?
Gorgonops, the first saber-toothed predators in Earth's history, possessed unique features that made them true kings of the Permian forests.
Imagine creatures that could reach 2 meters in length, with powerful jaws armed with teeth up to 10 centimeters long, like sharp knives.
Each tooth was capable of piercing the flesh of their prey, ensuring the Gorgonops' status as ruthless predators. But that's not all. Their skulls had distinctive crests that protected their brains during hunts and fights with rivals. Picture the scene when two such predators encountered each other. It was a battle of the titans where only the strongest survived.
Gorgonops did not just hunt small animals, they dominated the ecosystem, and their prey often included other predators like small dinosaurs and reptiles. But how did they achieve such success in their hunting skills? The secret lay in their exceptional sense of smell and vision. Gorgonops could detect the scent of their prey from up to 100 meters away, and their eyes, positioned on the top of their heads, provided a wide field of vision.
Additionally, their bodies were covered in tough skin that protected them from attacks by other predators. But there's more. Some researchers believe that Gorgonops could reach speeds of up to 30 kilometers per hour, making them excellent pursuers.
But what did they look like? Picture a body that was a mix of a modern wolf and a lizard, with a long neck and powerful legs that allowed them to move quickly through complex landscapes. And here's where it gets really fascinating. These creatures not only hunted but also formed packs, increasing their chances of success. Now, imagine if Gorgonops had survived into the modern world. How would they have adapted to new conditions filled with modern threats and competitors? The answer is shocking. Their ability to organize socially and hunt in groups could have given them a significant advantage. And what's even more shocking, these powerful predators went extinct around 250 million years ago, and the reason for their disappearance remains unknown. But one thing is certain, they left behind a legacy that scientists continue to study. Parareptiles, the first herbivorous reptiles, did not simply appear. They literally exploded into the ecosystems of their time. Imagine creatures reaching up to 3 meters in length, equipped with a unique armor that resembled a protective shield. Their robust bodies and powerful limbs were designed to survive in harsh conditions where competition for resources became fierce. But that's not all. Parareptiles used their sharp teeth not only for consuming vegetation, but also to fend off predators that sought to catch them. It's fascinating that these reptiles became a crucial part of the food chain, altering the balance of power in ecosystems. What's even more astonishing, they possessed the ability to regulate their body temperature, allowing them to survive extreme temperature fluctuations that could reach up to 30 degrees Celsius during the day and drop to zero at night. This was a true marvel of adaptation. Have you ever wondered how such large creatures could find food? They fed not only on leaves but also on tree bark, utilizing resources unavailable to many other animals. But that's not all. Their powerful jaws could crush hard plants, giving them an advantage in the struggle for food. And here's where it gets truly extraordinary. Unlike most other reptiles, parareptiles could survive without water for extended periods. This was a revolution in the world of reptiles. Scientific research shows that their habitats spanned vast territories from forests to deserts, making them one of the most adaptable creatures of their time. Now, imagine them hunting across landscapes where their size was like that of a small car, and their behavior resembled that of modern ostriches. Scientists continue to study their remains, and each new discovery reveals more mysteries. For instance, researchers have found that their skeletons had unique features that allowed them to survive in specific conditions of their time. The most incredible thing? They could reproduce even in conditions where most other species had gone extinct, making them true survivors in the world of reptiles. The formation of the supercontinent Pangaea was a true geological spectacle that dramatically transformed the face of the planet. Imagine, a vast mass of land, the size of today's continent of Africa, united all the lands that existed at the time into a single whole. This process began around 250 million years ago and concluded around 200 million years ago. But what is truly remarkable is that when Pangaea formed, the climate on Earth underwent colossal changes. Do you know how this affected the weather?
The interior regions of this supercontinent could become true deserts. Temperatures there could rise to 35 degrees Celsius, and humidity would drop rapidly. But that's not the most peculiar thing. The coasts of Pangaea were surrounded by an ocean that, according to geological data, had a temperature 10 degrees higher than today's. This meant that life in the oceans was boiling, as if on a frying pan.
And here's where things get really crazy. Some species of animals and plants began migrating in search of more comfortable climates, while others adapted to extreme conditions. For example, giant conifers that reached heights of 50 meters became dominant on land, forming impenetrable forests that were true centers of biodiversity. But what's even more shocking? As the climate became increasingly arid, many ecosystems began to change, opening the door to new species. But the most astonishing thing was that despite the global changes, Pangaea, due to its size, created conditions for the formation of numerous diverse microclimates. At the same time, mountain ranges like the Urals began to rise, creating barriers to the migration of animals and plants. This meant that some groups of species could remain isolated in their corners of the supercontinent, which contributed to their evolution into something entirely new. For instance, reptiles on Pangaea began to develop in various directions, and some of them became the ancestors of modern birds.
But wait, there's another detail. It was during this time that the first known ancestor of mammals appeared, a creature the size of a mouse that could survive in the most diverse conditions.
These changes laid the foundation for the future evolution of many species, and the climate that formed on Pangaea was undoubtedly a key factor in this story. It's interesting to note that as the supercontinent began to break apart, the climate on Earth changed again, leading to new epochs that witnessed the emergence of completely new ecosystems. While the colossal forests covered the coasts, vast interior deserts began to form in the heart of the supercontinent Pangaea. These deserts occupied territories comparable in size to modern countries, with areas reaching hundreds of millions of square kilometers. Imagine vast expanses where sand and rocks reigned in conditions that were intolerable for most living beings.
Temperatures in these deserts could reach 35 degrees Celsius in the shade, and annual rainfall was less than 30 millimeters. What happened next?
These harsh conditions gave rise to unique ecosystems where only the hardiest organisms survived.
For instance, movement across such deserts was not limited to vertebrates but also involved numerous invertebrates, including lizards as large as a hand. What's even more astonishing?
This was the time when the first amphibians appeared on Earth, beginning to colonize new ecosystems, but the desert conditions left only a few species alive. How did they survive in such conditions? The secret lay in their ability to withstand prolonged drought. Some species could go without water for months, even years. Now imagine this. In such extreme conditions, small oases emerged where life thrived.
Palm trees and shrubs the size of small cars attracted rare animals and insects. These deserts also became home to unique forms of life, such as ancient reptiles that developed thermoregulation abilities.
They hunted small mammals and moved silently across sand dunes. These desert landscapes were formed through complex geological processes that took place over millions of years. And here's where it gets really wild. Under the influence of wind and erosion, enormous sand dunes up to 30 meters high formed, capable of moving tens of kilometers a year. These dunes reshaped the deserts, creating new ecosystems. Interestingly, some of these deserts had their own microclimates where, for example, dew could fall in the mornings, providing life in the most arid conditions.
Moreover, as the climate changed and the continent broke apart, deserts began to fill with water bodies, creating entirely new ecosystems.
You won't believe this, but in some places in these deserts, fossils of ancient plants and animals were found, preserved in conditions of drought for millions of years. This opens up a whole world full of mysteries and secrets that are still waiting to be revealed.
Changes in geography during the Permian period had stunning consequences for the evolution of life on Earth.
Imagine all continents united in a single gigantic supercontinent called Pangaea, which occupied vast spaces and created unique living conditions.
But that's not all. The climate was uneven, with some areas experiencing eternal summer while others suffered from harsh conditions. What's most shocking?
These climatic contrasts led to the emergence of diverse ecosystems that seemed incompatible with each other.
Within the supercontinent, there were vast deserts where giant ferns reached heights of up to 30 meters, while in more humid regions, conifers similar to modern ones grew, but with unique properties that allowed them to survive in these conditions.
And here's where it gets really wild. In this harsh climate, the first reptiles began to dominate the land, reaching sizes comparable to modern crocodiles. What could their survival in such conditions mean? These reptiles had incredible adaptations that allowed them to survive in conditions of extreme temperature fluctuations, which in turn paved the way for further evolution. Now imagine that in the seas surrounding this supercontinent there were giant mollusks reaching the size of a person, hunting fish with their long tentacles. These marine predators were not only at the top of the food chain, but also became catalysts for changes in ecosystems, introducing new levels of interaction between species. How could this have happened? The answer lies in significant changes in sea level, which created new habitats and allowed for migration and colonization of new territories. But that's not all. During this time, events occurred that forever changed the appearance of life on Earth.
For example, as a result of catastrophic climate changes and geological processes, conditions arose that led to mass extinctions, with up to 95% of all species on the planet disappearing.
These catastrophes not only altered the composition of ecosystems, but also opened doors for new forms of life that could adapt and survive in conditions that once seemed impossible.
Ultimately, these events formed the basis for the emergence of dinosaurs, which dominated the planet in subsequent epochs. And the most incredible thing?
The first ancestors of dinosaurs were already evolving in conditions that once seemed too harsh for life. At the end of this period, the planet faced catastrophic changes that led to the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. Imagine a world where oceans heated up to 30 degrees Celsius, and the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere reached 7,000 parts per million, 100 times more than today. How could organisms survive in such conditions? The answer lies in the fact that many of them could not adapt. At this time, forests, once teeming with life, began to wither. Giant ferns, which once dominated ecosystems, gave way to more resilient forms of life. But what is truly shocking is that at this time there were toxic algae on Earth that could release toxins killing fish and other marine organisms. In such conditions, dead zones formed on the ocean floor where there was no oxygen at all, and this was just the beginning. Due to climate changes associated with volcanic activity, the level of oxygen in the atmosphere dropped to 21%. This meant that many species could not breathe normally, leading to further extinction. What is even more shocking, volcanoes erupted, spewing vast amounts of lava and gas, covering large areas and creating conditions for the formation of acid rain. These rains destroyed the soil, making it unsuitable for plant life.
Moreover, some species, such as trilobites and certain mollusks, disappeared forever. By the end of this period, approximately 95% of all species on the planet had gone extinct.
And here's the paradox. It was during this time that the first ancestors of dinosaurs began to appear, ready to fill the vacant niches in the ecosystem. How did they manage this? The secret lay in their ability to adapt to the new conditions that seemed unbearable for most.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg, for it was during this time that processes were taking place that could fundamentally change the very essence of life on Earth. Now imagine the horror that awaited those who survived in these conditions.
Siberian traps boast the most extensive volcanic activity in the history of our planet, and this is not just empty talk. Imagine that these colossal eruptions could spew out up to 30 million cubic kilometers of magma, which is twice the volume of all the water in the Black Sea. These volcanic flows formed vast plains stretching over more than 1 million square kilometers, and this is just the beginning. But what was happening amidst this catastrophe?
During eruptions, temperatures could reach up to 1000 degrees Celsius, and clouds of sulfur gas darkened the sun for many months.
As a result of this activity, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere rose to 130% of the current level, leading to catastrophic climate changes. What is most astonishing? These changes could have caused a mass extinction that affected 95% of all species on Earth. And that's not all. Subsequent changes in ecosystems led to the dominance of reptiles on land. Volcanic activities, such as those on the Putarana Plateau, resulted in the formation of basalt layers that preserved traces of this catastrophic period. Moreover, cracks in the earth formed during these eruptions could reach lengths of more than 2,000 kilometers. But how could these giant volcanoes have such an impact on life on the planet? The secret lies in the fact that the gases and ash released not only altered the composition of the atmosphere, but also influenced ocean currents, causing global climate fluctuations. And here is where things get truly extraordinary. The changes on land and in the water led to life on the planet taking on completely different forms. For instance, the marine mollusks with shells that we now consider common underwent incredible changes, adapting to the new conditions. And what is even more shocking? These changes laid the foundation for the appearance of the first dinosaurs, which soon dominated a new era on the planet. While dinosaurs were just beginning to occupy their niche on Earth, a catastrophe occurred that wiped out 97% of all species inhabiting the planet. This mass extinction, known as the Permian Triassic, was the greatest event in Earth's history.
One of the main causes of this global crisis was the intense volcanic activity in what is now Siberia, which led to the formation of vast volcanic plateaus known as the Siberian Traps.
Imagine this: eruptions spewing more than 2 million cubic kilometers of lava into the atmosphere, along with clouds of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide that instantly altered the atmosphere's composition. The heat from these volcanoes heated the oceans, and the water temperature reached 32 degrees Celsius. It was like a hot spring. Do you know what happens when ocean temperatures rise?
The destruction of ecosystems, coral reefs which served as homes for millions of marine creatures began to die en masse. But that's not the strangest part. The sudden drop in oxygen levels in the atmosphere, which fell to 30% of normal, played a significant role in the catastrophe.
Flora and fauna that depended on oxygen began to disappear at an alarming rate. Now imagine what happens to land animals. They faced food shortages because plants couldn't survive in such conditions. Multinodular creatures as long as a baseball bat and other giants that once dominated the planet found themselves trapped. How do you survive when there's no food and no air?
But that's not all. Climate changes led to some regions becoming deserts while others were flooded. And what's even more shocking, research shows that among these extinct species were even the ancestors of modern mammals. 3 million years of catastrophe led to Earth's slow recovery, but many species couldn't return.
And here's where it gets really crazy. Millions of years after this catastrophe, in the very same areas where the eruptions occurred, fossil remains of the first dinosaurs were discovered, which began their evolution in completely new conditions. This discovery changes our understanding of how life on Earth can adapt to the most extreme conditions. What other secrets of the past might these ancient lands hold? If you could look into the oceans of that time, you would see that nearly 96% of marine species disappeared as a result of one of the most catastrophic events in Earth's history. This wave of extinction, known as the Permian Triassic, affected not only small organisms but also giants that dominated marine ecosystems. Imagine the disappearance of entire ecosystems where the ocean floor was home to mollusks the size of a human and giant trilobites that hunted their rivals. But how did this happen? Around 260 million years ago, a combination of volcanic activity and climate change led to a rise in atmospheric carbon dioxide levels to critical values, reaching 12%. This resulted in a sharp increase in temperature, causing the formation of acidic rains that destroyed forests and poisoned water bodies. While terrestrial vertebrates, such as the ancestors of modern mammals, suffered from food shortages and changing habitats, marine life faced a true catastrophe. And here's where it gets truly bizarre. As a result of this extinction, up to 70% of all terrestrial vertebrates also disappeared. You could see entire groups of animals, including some dinosaur ancestors, vanish forever. But that's not the most astonishing part. Large amphibians that once filled ecosystems were on the brink of extinction, unable to adapt to the new climate. While some species were rapidly disappearing, others, smaller and more resilient, took advantage of the available niches. What's even more shocking? This period paved the way for the evolution of dinosaurs, which later dominated the Earth.
Think about it. An extinction event that nearly wiped out everything became the starting point for new forms of life and ecosystems that we know today. During the Permian Triassic extinction event, oceans became true dead zones. Imagine an area the size of all of Europe where life literally disappeared.
The water became so depleted of oxygen that even the most resilient marine creatures such as trilobites and many types of mollusks could not survive. What's even more shocking?
Due to the rapid climate change and volcanic activity, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere rose to such extremes that the oceans began to acidify.
Acidic rains that fell on the Earth eroded everything in their path, turning fertile lands into wastelands. Scientists estimate that the pH of marine water dropped to levels not seen in millions of years. These acidic rains destroyed ecosystems that were already on the brink of extinction. And here's where it gets truly bizarre. During this period, new types of organisms began to appear that could adapt to this extreme environment. For instance, some microbial communities began to thrive in low pH conditions, and their metabolism became a source of energy for other forms of life. And the most incredible part? These conditions gave rise to the first dolphins and sharks, which would later dominate the seas. Research shows that the level of oxygen in the oceans dropped to 20% of normal, which was a catastrophe for marine ecosystems. But even in such conditions, life found ways to survive and adapt. This is not just survival, it's a true miracle of evolution. How do you think life on Earth would look if this catastrophe had not occurred? The atmosphere underwent radical changes at this time. The oxygen content dropped to 30%, significantly lower than the levels familiar to many species, including dinosaurs. Imagine a planet where breathing became a real struggle for life. organisms that previously dominated ecosystems began to go extinct.
In their place came more resilient species capable of surviving in conditions where carbon dioxide levels reached 8%, double the current levels.
This was a true catastrophe. The oceans were oxidizing and marine life couldn't adapt as quickly. Do you know what happened to marine ecosystems? As a result of these atmospheric changes, not only fish but also many other organisms like mollusks, which couldn't cope with the change in oxygen levels in the water, disappeared.
But that's not the most extraordinary thing. On land, conditions were akin to hell. Temperatures reached 120 degrees Celsius, and all living things sought shelter. For example, some plant species adapted by developing thick, hard leaves that could retain the moisture necessary for survival.
And here's where it gets truly bizarre. At this time, giant reptiles existed on the planet capable of surviving in such conditions. These creatures, known as the ancestors of modern lizards, grew to the size of a small bus. They hunted smaller animals, using their sharp teeth to tear flesh. What's even more shocking? These reptiles were the first to begin exploring new habitats such as drier and hotter places, leaving their usual aquatic areas. As a result, many species began migrating in search of more comfortable conditions, and these journeys could span thousands of kilometers.
It's interesting to note that marine life was recovering slowly, and it took millions of years after the catastrophe for new ecosystems to emerge that could support life. But what kind of life emerged as a result of these changes?
The planet's population changed beyond recognition. Many species that we know today began to develop precisely when conditions on Earth began to slowly improve. Was this the beginning of a new evolutionary stage? The mysteries hidden in these changes continue to fascinate scientists, and new facts about how life on Earth adapted to extreme conditions are discovered every year. Among the survivors of the Permian-Triassic extinction were creatures that became the ancestors of all future dinosaurs and mammals. Imagine that only a few species became the foundation for a new era of life on Earth, while 97% of all animal and plant species disappeared. These surviving organisms evolved in conditions where the climate was rapidly changing, temperatures were rising, and oxygen levels in the atmosphere were decreasing. For instance, one of the earliest dinosaur ancestors, the archosaur, was the size of a modern crocodile and had powerful legs, allowing it to move quickly on land. But here's the fascinating part. These creatures possessed a unique metabolism that allowed them to survive in conditions where others could not. The secret lay in their ability to store oxygen and use it efficiently in the process of respiration, which enabled them to dominate ecosystems that were just beginning to recover. At this time, mammals were small and nocturnal creatures about the size of a mouse, which helped them avoid predators. However, what is astonishing is that despite their modest size, some of them had an incredible ability to regulate their temperature, allowing them to survive in fluctuating temperatures.
Ancient reptiles such as the cetaceans also became important participants in the ecosystem, resembling modern fish but with the ability to breathe air. What is even more remarkable? After millions of years, these very same survivors became the basis for the vast diversity of life forms we see today, and at this time, the first dinosaurs began to appear.
Their sizes ranged from small predators to giant herbivores that could exceed 30 meters in length. These creatures used their long necks to reach leaves from tall trees, giving them access to food that was unavailable to other animals. Now imagine how they hunted other animals, using their speed and agility to survive in this new world. Each of them brought something unique to the ecosystem, creating complex food chains.
But that's not all. It was during this time that the first mammals began to diversify and adapt to various conditions. Some started hunting small animals, while others evolved into large herbivores.
It's interesting to note that before the dinosaurs appeared, there were small but incredibly agile mammals that could have been remembered for their ability to adapt to the most unexpected conditions of life.
For example, their rough skin helped them retain heat, and their sharp teeth allowed them to eat seeds and fruits. What other amazing adaptations did these ancestors possess?
After the catastrophic Permian-Triassic extinction event, during which more than 94% of all species on the planet disappeared, ecosystems began to change rapidly. Imagine a desert where once there were dense forests. This created voids that needed to be filled. New groups of animals began to occupy ecological niches left by the extinct species, and among them, the first dinosaurs and mammals stood out. What's fascinating is that these new creatures possessed unique adaptations that allowed them to survive in conditions that they could not have previously penetrated. For example, early dinosaurs like Eoraptor were the size of a modern sparrow, but already had characteristics that allowed them to hunt small animals and insects. At this time, mammals began to evolve towards larger forms. The ancestors of modern mammals began to hunt reptiles and other animals that had not yet adapted to the new conditions. Now imagine that at this time, the first herbivorous dinosaurs like Hesperosaurus, which could reach lengths of up to 9 meters and weigh more than half a ton, appeared on Earth. These giant creatures hunted vegetation that no one had touched before. As a result, the creation of new ecosystems led to an explosion in the diversity of life forms. What's even more astonishing, the secret to the survival of many species lay in their ability to adapt quickly. For example, some mammals developed fur to retain heat, while others began to hunt at night to avoid competition with dinosaurs. These changes led to the appearance of new species that seemed to be designed for life in a world that was already different. It's interesting that at this time, mammals began to develop a complex social structure.
Groups formed for joint hunting and protection from predators. Imagine how they gathered together to survive in a world full of dangers.
These changes in behavior and anatomy allowed mammals to take a dominant position in ecosystems where reptiles once reigned. And it seems that this is just the beginning, for in the following millions of years we will see how mammals will begin to evolve in the most diverse directions, including the appearance of the first primates. This epoch will form the basis for all the biodiversity that we observe today. But what's most amazing? Some of these early mammals were the size of a cat but possessed characteristics that we would not expect to see in animals of that time.
On Earth, a catastrophe occurred that wiped out 95% of all life forms. This mass extinction opened the door to a new era, the Triassic period, when reptiles began to dominate the planet. But what exactly caused such a dramatic shift?
It turned out that after the Permian-Triassic extinction event, which happened around 250 million years ago, ecosystems needed time to recover.
Earth was almost empty, creating a unique opportunity for fast reproducing reptiles to occupy the vacant niches.
For example, some of the earliest dinosaurs, such as Eoraptor, appeared just a few million years after the catastrophe, and their sizes were only twice that of a cat. But what is truly astonishing, in the Triassic period, reptiles began to evolve into diverse forms and sizes, including giant sauropods which could reach lengths of 30 meters. Imagine them hunting animals the size of modern cows. This was not just survival, it was true dominance in conditions where competition was practically non-existent. Reptiles adapted to various ecosystems, from dry deserts to wet forests, allowing them to occupy all possible ecological niches.
But this is not the strangest part. While some reptiles became majestic herbivores, others, like the predecessors of theropods, began to develop predatory habits and hunt their own kind.
And here is where it gets really crazy. Some of these predators developed sharp teeth and powerful jaws that could tear flesh apart. Do you know what is even more shocking?
In the Triassic period, the first flying reptiles such as pterosaurs also appeared. They could soar over the earth like modern hawks, with wingspans reaching 10 meters, allowing them to hunt anything that moved. And what about marine reptiles?
This time saw the emergence of giants like plesiosaurs, whose lengths exceeded 10 meters. All these changes occurred against the backdrop of the reptiles' incredibly rapid evolution, and it was they who formed the basis for the future dominance of dinosaurs. And do you know what is the craziest part? These evolutionary changes made reptiles not just survivors, but true rulers of the planet for many millions of years to come. First archosaurs, emerging during this period, became true pioneers in the world of reptiles, and their evolution drastically altered the appearance of Earth. These creatures, including well-known representatives such as Archaeopteryx and Protoceratops, adapted exceptionally well to various living conditions. The most remarkable thing? Archosaurs possessed a body structure that allowed them to reach speeds comparable to modern predators, reaching up to 30 kilometers per hour. They hunted small animals and even other reptiles, using their sharp teeth and powerful jaws, making them true predators of their time. But that's not the strangest part. Archosaurs not only dominated on land, but also began to conquer water spaces. Some of them, like plesiosaurs, had streamlined bodies that allowed them to swim at incredible speeds, hunting fish and other marine creatures. Imagine a predator with a head the size of a human and teeth up to 30 centimeters long, unafraid of seaweed or other marine life. And things get even more bizarre. Archosaurs also began to evolve towards the creation of the first ancestors of dinosaurs. This meant that some of them, like theropod dinosaurs, started to develop their sizes and shapes, leading to the formation of giants like Tyrannosaurus rex, which weighed up to 8 tons. But that's not all. Archosaurs developed a range of adaptations to survive in constantly changing climates. Their skin became denser, protecting them from sunlight and harsh weather conditions such as heavy rain and low temperatures. Imagine archosaurs that could survive on the equator and then migrate to colder regions, facing completely new challenges. And what's even more shocking?
Some archosaurs developed their ability to fly, like Archaeopteryx, whose wingspan reached 80 centimeters.
These creatures could soar in the air, catching insects and small animals, giving them a significant advantage in the struggle for survival. Their feathers were not only for flight but also for thermoregulation, allowing them to adapt to various climatic conditions. This opens a new chapter in the history of evolution.
Archosaurs, who became the ancestors of dinosaurs, paved the way for true giants that would soon populate our planet, and their descendants will continue to amaze scientists for many millions of years.
But this is just the beginning of their fascinating journey.
Empty ecosystems began to fill up again during the Triassic period, and this process marked a true ascent into a new era. Imagine the once lifeless spaces suddenly coming back to life.
The first creatures to return were small reptiles that adapted to the new conditions, ranging from a few centimeters to a meter in length. And here's the fascinating part. Among these early settlers were the ancestors of modern lizards and snakes, which began to occupy various niches previously held by larger creatures. These reptiles, like Proterosaurus, hunted small insects and defenseless amphibians that also began to fill the void. What's even more astonishing, these small predators could reach lengths of up to 2 meters and had sharp teeth that allowed them to effectively catch prey. But this is just the beginning, for soon, true giants began to appear on the horizon.
Dinosaurs soon dominated the ecosystems. Their predecessors, like Curlophysis, were only a meter long, but their speed and agility allowed them to quickly climb the food chain. These reptiles hunted in packs, giving them an advantage over solitary prey. But wait, there's more. During the Triassic period, the first mammals also appeared, such as Morganocodon, the size of a modern mouse which hid from predators at night.
They had fur and likely could make sounds, making them quite unique compared to their reptilian neighbors. This competition for resources sparked a wave of changes in the ecosystem, leading to an incredible diversity of life forms. And at this point, the first flying reptiles like Pterosauria with a wingspan of up to 2 meters began to appear in the skies. Their flight was light and graceful, allowing them to hunt fish and insects from the air. And what if I tell you that they were the ancestors of pterosaurs, which later became true aerial predators? These creatures not only conquered the skies but also changed the rules of the game in ecosystems where previously only terrestrial animals dominated. And the most remarkable thing? These changes in ecosystems happened so quickly that scientists are still trying to unravel the mysteries of how exactly it all happened. The epoch of giant plants had a colossal impact on the evolution of life on Earth, and laid the groundwork for the appearance of dinosaurs. Imagine forests where each tree reached up to 100 meters in height, with trunks as thick as a small bus. These massive plants not only produced vast amounts of oxygen but also created unique ecosystems where centipedes as long as a baseball bat and insects with wingspans of up to 75 centimeters thrived. But that's not the strangest part. Entire colonies of giant amphibians existed in these ancient forests, capable of hunting their smaller kin by swinging their limbs like wings. These conditions created an ideal environment for nature to experiment with the sizes and forms of life, ultimately leading to the emergence of the first reptiles. But this is not the end of the story. The Permian-Triassic extinction, one of the most catastrophic in Earth's history, wiped out around 95% of all species on the planet, but it also created new ecological niches. The animals that survived this catastrophe began to evolve at unprecedented speeds. Ironically, this catastrophic period served as the catalyst for the emergence of giants like Triceratops and Tyrannosaurs, which dominated Earth for millions of years afterward. Have you ever wondered what ecosystems looked like where such colossal animals lived? It was a time when life on Earth faced true constraints, and in response, nature created monsters.
Without the epoch of giant plants and the subsequent ecological changes, dinosaurs might never have appeared on our planet. But the most astonishing thing is that even after the global extinction, life continued to adapt and change.
The time when our planet experimented with sizes and forms of life became the foundation for the ecosystems we know today. And what's even more shocking, the appearance of mammals in this context was a result of their ability to survive in a world dominated by reptiles.